Okay, so I'll establish this right off the bat. This is the Miller video. This is it. The video where I discuss the options, what the Canucks could do, and I give you my thoughts as to what I personally would like, because I do think this kind of gets a little bit jumbled up. Like, a lot of people sort of think, okay, because I talk about this idea or because I say or acknowledge this, it means that I want this to happen, right? Well, I don't want anybody going out there and putting words in my mouth and trying to change what it is that I apparently believe about this team, so I wanted to make this video to clear things up, and I also wanted to talk about another sort of comparison to JT Miller, because when you talk about the Canucks, you talk about, you know, figures in Canucks lore and people talking about this stuff on TV, on the radio. There are indeed some really interesting discussions that have popped up over the past few days. So I wanted to turn your attention to a video that I made 3 years ago before we get into all of that. This video was published in November of 2018. I made the thumbnail sitting in SE2 at BCIT on the Burnaby campus, just waiting after class with one of my friends and showing him afterwards, hey, does this thumbnail look good? I had this conversation back then in November, and the video was about Bo Horvat. Take a look at this. Can Bo Horvat be better than Ryan Kesler? And this was a video, admittedly, kind of premature into Bo Horvat's tenure as the Canuck captain. He wasn't the captain at this point, but this video pretty much explored something that was highlighted on Sportsnet by Merrick and McLean, as to whether or not Bo Horvat could be as good, if not better, than Ryan Kesler. As I said, a figured Canuck of the past who was really good in the early 2010s and who had a strong and unique edge to his game, which made him a fan favorite. The reason I'm bringing this up is because that video, it's kind of bogus now. We're not talking about Ryan Kesler, we're not talking about Bo Horvat. Instead, we're talking about the idea of a Ryan Kesler-type player being fulfilled in not a Bo Horvat, but a JT Miller. The reason we're talking about that is because earlier on Hockey Night in Canada, it was actually Kevin Bieksa on the panel with Jen Botterill. I believe it was Ron McLean, and I think it would have been Kelly Hrudey as well. I'm not too sure. I just know Bieksa was there. But Kevin Bieksa went on a whole spiel talking about how JT Miller is a super gritty, super competitive, very capable two-way player who's extremely consistent for the Canucks this year. He highlighted Miller's desire to win and how that unwavering drive is one of the many qualities that makes him akin to the former Canucks Selke winner in Ryan Kesler. If we go over Kesler, take a look at the profile that he did possess. Drafted 2003, became a pretty consistent Canuck by the time 2006 rolled around, but in 2009, that's really when he exploded and became the beast that he became. He had consistent 20-goal years, he became a 70-point scorer in 2010 and in 2011, and in the latter of those 2 years, he also had 40 goals. He was on the power play with the Sedins, he was a one-timer option, he was a guy that could come in and just wrist goals like crazy from the point, of all places. And aside from that, his two-way ability, PK ability, shutdown game was solid. It's why he won the Selke for the defensive forward in the year. And at this point, there were so many people saying things like, okay, Kesler is our second-line center behind Henrik Sedin, but he is one of those centers that if you put him onto most other NHL teams, he would be a first-liner instead. There was that entire Evgeny Malkin conversation going on with Kesler where it was like, yeah, he's only a second-line center because there's a franchise guy above him on the lineup. Like, it's not because he is a second-line caliber guy. He could very well be a first-line guy. It's why internationally you would see Kesler going out there playing with guys like Patrick Kane, etc., because he was just that good. The Michigan native in his prime was one of the most stable, gritty, and passionate Canucks to go out there. And I say passionate because you could really tell when the going gets tough and when it really goes down to crunch time, Ryan Kesler would be one of the guys that would consistently step up and always get in the mix. Now, for JT Miller, he's somewhat in a similar position, and Kevin Bieksa made that point on Hockey Night in Canada that Miller is somewhat of that replacement that we wanted to see when Kesler departed in 2014. I made that video 3 years ago talking about, oh, is Bo Horvat going to be the next Kesler? When really, the Canucks would make a trade for JT Miller the next season, and he would prove instead to be more of that Ryan Kesler-like guy. When it comes to the desire to win, okay, Kesler and Miller, they both got that. Not to disrespect anybody else who has been on the Canucks the past few seasons, but you can really see it on the ice. Like, there isn't really anybody else who is more determined and more eager to go out there and force goals to come his way than JT Miller is. When you talk about the two-way stability, okay, Miller plays in the PK, Ryan Kesler played in the PK, they're both pretty solid guys along the boards, they can grind it out, they can win puck battles pretty easily. When Ryan Kesler was a lot more of a sniper when he was shooting from distance, Miller was not afraid to go out there, dangle the pants off of a guy or two, and also get the puck by the goalie. He also can snipe it when he wants to. The fact is, a lot of the soul of the Canucks flows through guys like Miller and guys like Kesler. And so, I stand corrected 3 years later that Bo Horvat isn't really that Kesler-type guy. Even the comment section of that video was filled with a whole bunch of people saying that same thing. But unbeknownst to me at the time, the Canucks would eventually make a trade for a guy who displayed a profile even more similar to Kesler that it bears repeating once again. Furthermore, I mean, Kessler's from Michigan, he went to Ohio State University. Miller is also from Ohio, so there you go, another American connection there. Something about gritty American players, man. They're just very fun to watch, eh? And so now I wanted to talk about JT Miller as a trade chip, and what the Canucks should do, or what I think the Canucks should do at least, because I'm just one guy. My opinion is not really more important than yours, or anybody else on Twitter, or anybody else in the media, because ultimately, the opinion that matters the most is Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin's. Castonguay, Coronato, these individuals are the ones whose opinions matter the most, not really ours, right? And so when it comes to JT Miller as a potential trade piece, we're hearing more and more talk from people in the NHL media, insiders, analysts with insider info and all that Miller is a lot less of a likely trade candidate today than he was maybe a few weeks ago, and we're hearing more and more that Boeser could be the guy moved instead. Now, I get it, there are a lot of people going out there talking about, especially on Twitter, how trading JT Miller is the better move, because if you're going to go out there and project the Canucks to be a good team, a contending team, a legit playoff runner team, 3 or 4 years from now, what do you think is going to help you out more in that time frame? JT Miller, who would be in his early 30s, maybe after a few withered down seasons because the way he plays is really physical, it's really grindy, who knows how long of a lifespan a player like that has in the National Hockey League, especially while also being as effective as he is today? If Miller re-signs with the Vancouver Canucks, he'll get a lot of money. Let's say $7-8 million bucks, because he is arguably the best player on the Canucks forward core, and he's definitely the most consistent. This is a guy that demands money. And so, if the Canucks in a few years are already a playoff contender, what do you think is more valuable to the team then? Whatever type of player Miller is, for however much money he's going to be making, or the draft picks and the prospects and the assets they would acquire if they traded Miller today or next year? The fact that Miller is a top 10 point scorer in the league, or I don't know if he still is, but he was there earlier this week, the fact that he is that good means that there will be teams going out and shelling a fortune for him should a trade actually be made. Plus the fact that he's got an extra year in that contract, which is really great. It's under $6 million. You're getting a point per game, 90-point pace player for just under $6 million bucks. That is fantastic. There's going to be a lot of assets going around should Miller actually get traded. Now, what I think the Canucks should not do in this situation is settle. What they did with Ryan Kesler was they traded him to Anaheim for a package that wasn't really all too great, mostly because Kesler would only accept a trade to Pittsburgh, Chicago, or Anaheim. They had to settle because the guy wanted out, and they really had no choice in the matter. For JT Miller, there is an option here. They can keep him, they can re-sign him, they can get him around long-term if they really wanted to, but they don't necessarily need to trade him. He's already a pretty good player, and the concerns that a lot of people are having are all conditional. Who knows if JT Miller and his versatility in the NHL will actually wane as his career progresses? Who knows if he actually will go out there and decline in production or decline in his effectiveness as he enters his early 30s? Sure, I definitely understand the idea that if you trade Miller today, the assets that you get are going to be more helpful in the long-term future than if you just kept Miller around. But the way things are going, it might not appear that Miller is as likely to get traded anymore based off of what we're hearing from the NHL insiders. I'll bring up one more point over here as well. This is all coming from the perspective of the Canucks potentially being a contender team, let's say 4 or 5 years from now. Let's say JT Miller re-signs 8 years, $8 million bucks a season. Let's say he's now 33 years old because we're 5 years into the future. We don't know how good he's going to be, yes. We can assume the team is probably going to be better then than it is today under Rutherford and Allvin, but I will say, if Jim Rutherford does believe this team can get better sooner than that, let's say they give it a timeline of 2 to 3 years instead, not saying they need to do that, just saying if they do believe that, I could understand if they go out there and say, okay, 2-3 years, JT Miller is 30, he's not 33, he's 30 flat, and it's a lot easier to assume that he still will be pretty valuable at the NHL level than not. And so it all comes down to timelines, right? If you do feel the Canucks are going to be good in 2028, 2028, then okay, it probably would serve you better to trade Miller just in case you don't believe Miller can sustain the amount of production and play that he has had this year until he's 33, 34. If you think the Canucks are going to get better and become a playoff contender in 2 years, though, it makes a lot more sense if you wanted to say re-sign Miller, keep him on board, and once the Canucks are better, he'll also be pretty good. It's a game of likelihood, is it not? Because whichever one of these scenarios is more likely depends on the person you're asking, pretty much. So let me know in the comments all your thoughts about JT Miller. Do you still think the Canucks should trade him? Because even though you're going to get so much stuff if you trade this guy, you get more stuff than Besser, you get more stuff than Horvat, more stuff than any other player the Canucks have traded before, arguably, since that Ryan Kesler. I can totally understand the perspective of keeping JT Miller around instead, especially since that's what we're hearing more from the NHL insiders than the idea that he's going to get traded. So let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.